Hey friends, I'm so excited for you to join me here on the Chronicles of the Cosmic Scavenger Hunt. If you haven't watched the first video about what is the Cosmic Scavenger Hunt, I would go back and do that first. And for these first few chapters, I'm going to be sharing about what clues and discoveries have come up for me and those around me during the March 2025 eclipse season and afterwards. So I don't know if you know this, but eclipses always come in pairs, a lunar eclipse and a solar eclipse, and sometimes there's a third one, but most of them come in pairs. And this most recent eclipse season was the culmination of energy that had started 2 years ago. So it was interesting to see themes that were arising during this eclipse season that I had started 2 years ago. And that was definitely true for me. And this was probably the first eclipse season where I was paying really close attention and I was living life in the scavenger hunt. So every clue was fascinating, not always comfortable, not always easy. And that's really important to keep in mind. And so the energy of eclipses, it can be revelations of things, it can be a huge acceleration. And the metaphor that came to me right before the eclipses in a session with a client was this metaphor of a slingshot or the energy of a slingshot. So if you think about the eclipses being the energy that pulls you backwards. So it felt to me a lot like, things were rising to the surface that was old emotions, old patterns, things like that. And I was like, why is this happening? But of course I get curious now and I'm like, okay, what am I meant to learn from this and what still needs to be seen, to be healed, to be cleared here? And then once you get back to, the most tension, because that's what it feels like. It feels like this tension coming up. What I've now learned is you actually have to take action to release or pull the trigger, but we'll get to that in a few chapters. So, what I'm going to share today is all about that discomfort of things starting to come to the surface, old patterns. There, of course, were already some learnings along the way, and I captured this while it was fresh because that's what I like to do. I don't have it all figured out yet. I'm still in the middle of this. We just finished the April full moon, which was an extension of this eclipse season, and things are still coming into focus and clarity for me. I'm still following the clues, but I want you to have kind of the background of where this all started. So follow along here on chapter 1. And yeah, I'm super excited to hear what was maybe happening for you after the March eclipses, what you've been noticing, and any reflections that you have for me, something that maybe I haven't seen in what I'm sharing. Thanks so much and enjoy the show. I wanted to share a little bit about how everything has unfolded for me. And it's still unfolding, but it feels alive and it feels fresh. So I wanted to capture it now and share it with you. So I think the first thing that's really relevant here is just before the first eclipse, I had a session with a client, a quantum hypnosis session, and the metaphor of a slingshot came up related to what she was experiencing and that sense of, getting pulled backwards before you launch forward. And that metaphor has just kept coming up. It's been coming up in the collective and even in my own experience. Between the two eclipses, was feeling really, really drained of energy. And there was nothing else really in my life to explain why I was feeling that way. And even though I'm aware of being in the slingshot energy and what's happening with the eclipses, I was like, oh my gosh, what is going on? Why am I so exhausted? Is something wrong? I felt like I was stalling out. But at the same time, I was having all of these what felt like really old kind of emotions, scenarios pop up, mostly in friendships and in relationships with people around me. And I had quite a few triggering situations that really had me ruminating, and I don't ruminate much anymore, which is a massive shift in my life since I've been, on my massive healing journey and doing a lot of the work that I'm now sharing. So I don't find myself in my head trying to understand what's happening, why did that happen, why am I feeling this way. I don't spend much time like that. And so when that experience of rumination came back for me, I was like, there's something here that wants to be seen. And so now looking back on it, of course, I can see that was the slingshot energy. And that was what I was seeing between the first and the second eclipse. Things that were kind of, old patterns that maybe you even thought that you were done with were popping back up. So, and, often we use the metaphor as the healing journey or the spiritual journey is like a spiral going up. And you'll see things from a different vantage point, but it's kind of the same theme. And that's because we're healing in layers and evolving in layers. So some of the themes that were coming up for me during the eclipse corridor, so between the two eclipses, were things like not trusting my intuition. So getting a really clear intuitive knowing that something didn't feel aligned for me and not speaking it out of fear of upsetting someone else. Also, starting to notice that certain friendships weren't feeling aligned anymore, but convincing myself that I needed to stay in them. And also a big theme that was coming up is this sense that I feel comfortable in the role of student, of sidekick, of teacher's pet, but not the actual person in the spotlight, in the lead. And I also noticed that I have had an old pattern of pedestaling people who were in more of a leadership role, a mentor or something like that, and kind of taking what they say as gospel. And then as I grow and strengthen my own knowing, and perhaps things don't align anymore, or especially if I see them acting out of integrity, not speaking up, but also just kind of running away and not trusting my own knowing about whether that's okay for me or not, or whether I agree or not. So I would have a tendency to put people on a pedestal, and then if I saw their human flaws, I would also kind of knock them off, and then I would dismiss everything that I'd learned from them. And that's something I've been really aware of not doing, because I know that everyone I've learned from on my journey is human, and we all have shadow aspects that we're not aware of, things that we're working through. That's true for me as well as a teacher, a practitioner. I am so committed, though. That is one thing I know about myself, is that this is a devotion. This is the way of life. This is not a hobby for me. I am so utterly committed to the expansion of my own consciousness in service of the expansion of all consciousness, because whatever I heal and integrate within me has a ripple effect on the collective, and that's true for everyone else. And I think that's why I'm so passionate about supporting people doing this type of work as well. So I started to see these themes rising up between the eclipses, and it culminated in me attending a retreat where I was learning how to facilitate group space, which is something that I've really been wanting to do. I've had a lot of experience doing one-on-one life coaching, now quantum hypnosis. In my past lifetime as a corporate person, I actually facilitated a lot of workshops, and that was something that I really enjoyed doing. But there was this belief within me that I was still lacking some type of knowledge or experience to be able to do that in a more spiritual space. And it's also really important to me to be able to hold a safe container, hold a safe space where people feel like they can really go to those places within themselves that they might be afraid, to show other people, where they feel like they can be vulnerable. A space that's trauma informed, a space without judgment, and a space where we can learn from and reflect with each other without crossing each other's boundaries. And so I was really wanting to learn skills, and I set the intention before I went to the retreat that I wanted to feel ready to hold my own group session when I left. And the way that the magical scavenger hunt works is it hands you the opportunity, not in the way that you thought it was going to be. So I thought I would, come back from the retreat, and I would reach out to the woman who owns the local yoga studio, and we would book a date far in advance. And I would, feel very prepared, and I would have great marketing, and I would get my friends to come along, and it would be all beautiful and perfect. And that is old wounding for me. It needing to be a certain way, it needing to be all planned out, perfect, in control. And instead, right when I arrived at the retreat, a woman running the retreat asked me if I would be up for running a group quantum hypnosis session like 5 minutes later. And I was so unprepared. I didn't have any of my material. There wasn't even any Wi-Fi, so I was like, how am I going to play the music? And I'd never done a group session, although I did have a group script that ChatGPT had helped me with, and it wasn't what I wanted to use, but it was giving me ideas of how you could run a group session. So I just asked, okay, is there a hotspot I can use real quickly? And I spent 5 minutes just getting together like the basics so that I could run what ended up being like a 45-minute group session for about 6 or 7 people. And it wasn't perfect by any means, but it got me over that hump, and I manifested my intention within the first hour of getting there. So I wouldn't say I felt comfortable, but I did it, and that helped me get over the hump. So that was just such a magical way that things unfolded for me. And then I was so curious about so many things that had kind of been in my mind about holding space for groups. And I got the opportunity to ask the woman running the session lots of questions throughout the weekend. I also got to co-lead a drum journey, and I'd never played the drum until the day before. And it was not easy. And I realized I would have to practice that a lot, but that was perfect knowledge. And I learned so much about holding ceremony and setting ground rules and so many beautiful things, which was why I was drawn to learn from this woman. And without sharing too much information, that is not my story to tell, there was an interesting kind of meta experience happening during the weekend. Dynamics playing out between the women who were there, and it all kind of came to a head on the last day. And one of the things that I had noticed kind of arising within me over the course of the weekend was this desire to speak my truth, but fear. Fear that the woman who was facilitating wouldn't like what I had to say, that I would be ridiculed, chastised, outcast, like some pretty deep kind of witch wounding fears coming up. And because it was all women, I'm sure there were sisterhood wounds there too, where I was afraid of, I think, and now I realize I was dimming my own light because I was afraid of, I didn't want to come across as, a know-it-all, or who does she think she is? But I did feel like I had a lot to share from my own personal experience. And so on the last day, the scavenger hunt orchestrated this, I don't know if you've heard the life described as each of us is creating our own reality, and it's like a play, and all of these people are characters in our play, just like we're characters in their play. And that's why it's so kind of wild the way the scavenger hunt works. On the last day, so many of the questions that I had about holding space manifested in reality. And as I was sitting there watching this dynamic play out, I wanted to speak up. And I sat there with a bit of fear. But before that, I had written, let me see if I can find it quickly, on my intentions in one of the exercises we'd done. I am safe to speak my truth. You see it down there at the bottom. And that was sitting in front of me on the altar cloth. And the facilitator had said, when I asked her, when do you kind of say something? Because one of the ground rules is that we don't comment on what someone else shares in circle, which I think is actually a really important ground rule. And I saw even how much more important it was. And she said that when she speaks her truth, it's usually after she's gotten the download or the message 3 times internally, like an intuitive hit 3 times, and only then will she say something. So as I was watching this dynamic play out in this, beautiful cosmic play in front of me, I kept getting the message, you should say something, you should say something, you should say something. And I didn't until later. So there was a situation where one of the participants left and we were kind of debriefing afterwards, and I did finally speak up and say, actually, I could see this person's perspective. She was no longer there to speak for herself, and I could see what was happening for her, and I didn't speak up. And we debriefed a bit about how I could have spoken up, or, what could be done differently in the future. But that wasn't the point of it for me. What it made me realize is I knew I could feel what was happening. I could see what was happening. And I've been in these situations in medicine journeys before where it feels like I've kind of stepped in to hold space for people, and it just showed me that I am ready, and I know. I really do know that I live by my philosophy of coming from a heart-led space, and that I am here to be of service, and that I genuinely want what is best for everyone in the group. And sometimes that's not easy, I wouldn't change anything that happened in this situation because it was perfect I'm sure, for what we all needed. But when I think about holding space myself, now I have a really clear idea of how I want to do that and how I want to lead.